Football
is America. If you don't like it, you can kiss your candy ass at the moment in time. I don't give a damn. Oh my God. You love this.
30-27. Chiefs win. Chiefs win 30-20.
We're going to talk about a guy named Baker Mayfield who found himself a job with Tampa Bay after a stunt with the Rams, hosting a playoff game, getting into the playoffs by beating the Carolina Panthers 9-0. Basically, there were no good vibes coming from Tampa going into that game. It was like Tampa, Philly,
trash game.
Yeah, it's like I don't trust any of these teams right now. But then Baker Mayfield showed you another side of him. And to me, that was a monster performance. Now, we talked about this with what happened last year with Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones beat the Vikings in the playoffs, and we all said the Giants have a franchise quarterback because Daniel Jones had fantastic numbers, passer rating, no picks, multiple touchdowns, scrambled. It was an amazing game. And then he got destroyed the next week by the Eagles.
Yeah.
And nobody talks about Daniel Jones the same way ever since, really. They just don't. And that's what's going to happen to Baker. If he gets blown out in Detroit, we're not going to look back and say, remember when he beat the Eagles? We're going to say, remember when he beat an Eagles team that got into the playoffs 1-5 and they were falling apart and the locker room was divided, and no one's going to be like, that was the statement win. However, now he's going to Detroit. And call me crazy, but from the way I saw Baker Mayfield play in that game, I thought that there was a lot to love. And if you're a Bucs fan, there's a lot of reasons to feel confident going into this game. Yeah. Now, I still believe that the Rams were one of the toughest NFC teams, and Detroit passed that test. Now they're staying at home. And I was a little torn on this one, but ultimately I have the Lions here. I got the Lions. I think the Lions are going to be able to run the football. Jared Goff's playing really well. The defense is playing great. Aiden Hutchinson's getting pressure, something Baker Mayfield had zero of in that game. Keep in mind, he had zero pressures. He was not pressured in the game. Meanwhile, Jalen Hurts was pressured the most he's ever been in his career in that game. So I think we saw what Baker can look like when the pocket's clean and everything's going their way. But I don't think it's going to be that way. I think that he's going to be disrupted. I think that there's going to be moments that are going to be difficult. Baker's done this. He did it in Lambeau, had a perfect passer rating. We've seen what he's capable of when everything goes his way, but we've also seen what this team looks like when pressure is coming in, when they're not on the same page, when they are a little bit flustered. And the dangerous thing about the Bucs is the house money. They've already won their season. Baker Mayfield is being paid like $1 million this year. There's teams that have a $40 million quarterback that aren't even in the playoffs. This is already a massive dub. This is a free agent acquisition. This was for a lot of people, they considered it a rebuild year. We'll get a bad record and draft a quarterback. Not so fast. Baker Mayfield has you one game away from an NFC championship game. I can't believe that we're saying this, but that's how the playoffs work. You win one and you're just one away. So that makes this team more dangerous than they would be on their own, is that it's house money. I said it already, but they don't have that pressure. Now, Detroit's at home. I feel like they kind of got the monkey off their back with that first playoff win. So that's why if that monkey was still on the back, maybe I like the Bucs here as an upset. But I think the Lions are going to come out and continue to play with great energy. I don't think the moment's going to be too big for Goff. This is a guy that's already gone to a Super Bowl. I'm going to take the Lions to keep on rolling, but I think Tampa is going to play a competitive football game, and I think the Lions pull away at the end.
How can you not pick the Lions in this game, right? Like they just had No. I'm just saying, like,
No, I
in
get it.
general. Okay. How can you not pick the Lions? Their first ever playoff game at home, and they beat their number one, their first round quarterback in Matthew Stafford on the Rams. The city is electric. They have the entire city behind them. You got Dan Campbell celebrating, Jared Goff beating his former team that he took to the Super Bowl, lost it, of course, but he took them there. It's just this Detroit story is amazing. And Jared Goff last week, dude, he played that game extremely well. No pressure, no turnovers. Laporta scored a touchdown. Amon-Ra St. Brown came up big in catches. Like, everything was perfect for the Lions, and that's what gave them that win last week. Yes, their offense looked shaky and really didn't do anything in the second half, but their defense really like clamped down the fucking Rams offense. And they played super well. They played extremely well. What Jared Goff has to do in this game is continue to get to Laporta, in the end zone, continue to get it to Amon-Ra St. Brown, his big playmakers, and they got a running back duo of Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs that just seems to be like unstoppable. This whole season, we talked about the acquisition of David Montgomery and then drafting Jahmyr Gibbs while letting go of DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams. They're two guys who we really thought last season were going to be their two-headed monster running back, right? Like, you got DeAndre Swift with the quickness and the power, and Jamal Williams just getting in those short yardage plays, kind of like Gus Edwards with the Ravens. Like, he's scoring those touchdowns, right? We said that last season. He had the most touchdowns by a running back, and then this season they get him one at the final second of the season. So Jared Goff and the Lions, man, they just, their story is amazing. Dan Campbell has really brought this team up, from really the ashes, from biting kneecaps, from getting hit, getting taken down, and coming back up and hitting back even harder, right? What I am worried a little bit about is the offensive line for the Lions. Yes, they did a lot for Jared Goff, but they did let up 3 sacks against a mid to bottom tier Rams defense, right? Like, don't get me wrong. Aaron Donald on that side, and he's got a couple other playmakers there. They will eventually get to the quarterback. But the troubling part is that they really didn't do that a lot during the season. And the fact that this offensive line gave up 3 in one game, kind of a little scary, right? Like, you're like teetering. You're like, oh shit, are they going to do the same? Like, what's going to happen, right? And that's why I'm picking the Bucs. I'm picking the Bucs for an upset in Detroit. I am picking the Bucs to beat the Lions 27-24. I said it. It's hard. It's hard not to pick the Lions. But the Bucs defense is so legit against a veteran offensive line like the Eagles, a better quarterback in Jalen Hurts than Jared Goff. Like, they're just so much better. The Bucs defense has been top tier all season. And what do they do a lot? And they showed it last week against DeAndre Swift. Bart's got all that running game. They only let up 42 rushing yards. Montgomery and Gibbs, as good as they are, I think this Bucs team is going to be able to stop them. You all of a sudden make the Lions a one-dimensional pass team. All you got to do is make sure Amon-Ra St. Brown doesn't get loose. That's really it. Laporta still kind of hobbling, still has that cast around his leg. What's that?
Easier said than done. This is a guy that had like 120 yards, and he's got the third most separation of any receiver. It was Tyreek, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St.
Exactly. But they got a guy named Antoine Winfield Jr. there on that side that is going to be doing his best to bring down Amon-Ra St. Brown. I credit Amon-Ra with what he's done, being picked where he was picked, and how he can name all 17, 20 receivers taken before him. And what he's been able to do on this Detroit team is basically like I've been saying, go from the bottom feeder of a league to you're in the divisional round now. You know what I mean? So this is a great story for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And you're right. Easier said than done. What the Bucs are going to be able to do is they're going to be able to get to Jared Goff. They're going to be able to get to Jared Goff pretty often, in my opinion, with how badly they played against that Rams defense. This is the playoffs. Things are amped up. Players are going to play at the highest level, right? Like, that is definitely a thing you hear players talk about all the time. But this Bucs defense held the Eagles to 276 total yards offense last week. We already talked about the 42 rushing yards, 13 first downs, 0 for 9 on third downs, 0 for 2 on fourth downs. That is absolute domination on the defensive side of the ball. And then Baker Mayfield, 307 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions in his last 5 games, Kyle. 11 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, over 1,400 yards passing in his last 5 games, to include the game against the Eagles. And you take that one away, he's got what, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 1,100 yards. Like, it's still a fucking amazing recent 5 games, recent time that Baker has played quarterback. He's got his favorite target in his tight end Otan. He's got a sure-handed Mike Evans, a future Hall of Famer, and Trey Palmer, the guy who broke tackles from the Eagles to get a 50-whatever yard touchdown. Playmaking rookie. This Bucs offense is scary, and what Detroit was unable to do offensively, I think that might be a problem for them, in that second half, because they have to play perfect. They have to play like that first half against the Rams this entire game against this Bucs defense. It's going to cause them a lot of trouble. But I really do think that Jared Goff is going to be good for 1 or 2 interceptions, 1 or 2 fumbles, 1 or 2 turnovers in general in this game because of this Bucs defense. And I think that is what's going to kill the Detroit Lions in this game. They're at home. It's going to suck. Detroit Lions fans are going to be heartbroken, but just like you said about the Bucs, their season is already won. I think the Lions winning their first playoff game at home in a wild card round, I think their season is also already won. Of course, you've got another home playoff game. You want to win this one too. And it's going to suck and the pain is going to be there. But to go from not making the playoffs last season to winning your first home playoff game, like, just imagine what the future holds for the Lions. And I know Lions fans don't want to hear that, and they're not going to want to hear that, but I think that's exactly what's going to happen, man. And like Bill said, they stopped the tush push too. They stopped the most impossible play to stop. I am taking the Bucs to win this one in Detroit, 27-24. Baker Mayfield goes to the NFC Championship game against the 49ers.
I have a really similar score. It's just flipped. And now here's the thing about Tampa. The Eagles, their offensive line, they went into the wild card round with the most elite offensive line in the NFL. But, bro, it's hard to really judge Tampa, what they did with the way the Eagles offense played. Now,
yeah,
I have
right.
I have some stats here that I think are really, really important for perspective. Tampa Bay had 11 plays with unblocked pressure. Unblocked. That's an offensive issue. That is an offensive line issue.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily something the Bucs are doing. That's something that the Eagles didn't do. That was the most in a playoff game since 2006. 11 plays with unblocked pressure. There's another one. Tampa Bay's unblocked pressure. The Buccaneers had 11 plays with unblocked pressure against the Eagles, most in a playoff game in the PFF era. Tampa Bay hounded Jalen Hurts, blitzing on 27 to 39 dropbacks that helped the defense rack up 11 plays with unblocked pressure, 2 more than the second place 2019 Bills.
Wow.
So I think there was a lot of, I think it's the same reason the tush push wasn't working. I think the offensive line shit the bed totally in this game. Now, if you look at the number 2 offensive line that's available right now, it's the Lions. The Lions have they've been Graham Glasgow, Penei Sewell, Frank Ragnow, Jonah Johnson, Taylor Decker. This is as good as it gets with run blockers. And it's the only team that's comparable to Philly's offensive line. The only difference is they actually showed up last week. They contained Aaron Donald. We're not talking about these kinds of stats with something the Rams did last week. We're talking about these stats for what the Bucs did against the Eagles. I do think the Lions offensive line is a lot better than what we saw from the Eagles. And I think it's going to be a solid reminder really quick. Like, oh, this is a different team. This is not whatever that Eagles team was going through. It might be months before we really know what happened or why they fell apart the way they did. But even what they were best at, they were historically bad at in that game. And I think that really inflated the Bucs a lot, and especially with their, speaking of their defense. Now they do have defense. They do have like guys like, this is not that I'm not predicting the Lions to blow it out, but I Amon-Ra St. Brown, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. This is not an Eagles team that is totally fallen apart. This is a Lions team that got hot at a good time. We got worried about them, but not anymore.
Yeah.
And makes the game more interesting. I'm glad that you went Bucs, and I don't think it's that crazy. But I have the same score, but I have it flipped. I think the Lions are going to do a better job protecting Jared Goff than the Eagles did protecting Jalen Hurts.
And see, that's where, like you're saying, the Lions have the second best offensive line, and that's a stat. That's just facts, right? But what they did last week against a team with their top sack getter throughout the season was 2 sacks. You got to the quarterback 3 times. Your top sack getter has 2 sacks. You know what I mean? For the Rams, and you're able to get to him 3 times. That offensive line is showing some cracks now. You know, and in a big game, it was that close, right? Like, your offense wasn't able to do anything really except get 2 field goals in the second half. Don't get me wrong. I love that the Lions won. Can the Lions go to the NFC Championship? Absolutely they can. But I really do think red zone. What about red zone defense?
They held the Rams to 4 field goals in the red zone. Like, they couldn't score in the red zone.
Yeah.
Like, we saw,
and especially in the second half, man. In the second half, they were doing amazing. But I just think, like, when you have a bottom tier defense like that and you go up against a top tier rushing defense, you know, those front 4 rushers for the Bucs, I think Todd Bowles, what he was doing was rushing 5 guys every single time. It's just like, who's going to be rushing from the linebacker, from the cornerback, right? Like, which one is these guys going to be rushing? He was doing that all day against Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. So I think against Jared Goff, you're going to cause a couple turnovers. You're going to cause him to make some mistakes, and you win it that way.
Keep in mind, the way you slow down a pass rush is by running the football, which they didn't do at all. The Eagles didn't run with Kenneth Gainwell. They didn't run it.
Gainwell,
yeah. They didn't get DeAndre Swift going. That never happened. So yeah, the Bucs were like, we'll send 5 every time because you guys can't run the football. You're not going to have that issue in Detroit. They're going to run the football. If they send 5 every time, they're going to get blown out.
But they were sending 5 every time because they stopped the run. Because they were stopping the run.
Yeah, they're not stopping Detroit's run. That's not a thing.
I think they can.
They are not. It's not like they've gone all season as, you know, like, oh, the one thing that the Bucs are one of the best in the league at is stopping the run. Like, we haven't been saying that. Like, it's just been one game against the Eagles, and I think Detroit actually has the number 2 run defense in the NFL.
Yeah.
And Tampa Bay is not far behind, but San Francisco's number 3. And then you get Tampa 92.3 rushing yards allowed per game. And then for offense, if you talk rushing yards per game, the Lions, I think, are like number 1 or number 2. So the fact that we're having this conversation definitely tells you that this is, if you had to say, a key matchup. Because this affects the pass rush. This affects everything.
100%.
So I'm willing to say, that will be a key matchup. The Lions running offense versus Tampa Bay's rushing defense.
And I was going to say too,
if weapons, man,
kind of what you're saying too with Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, I think they've been one of the better running back duos in pass pro too. So even if they do send a 5th guy, you got those 2 tough motherfuckers. And I know David Montgomery from being a Bear, he is good in pass pro, picking up that rusher from Tampa Bay, from any other opposing team. So like you said, it's going to be a very interesting matchup to look at, because almost like Crafty said, and what Bill was agreeing to, who can get to the quarterback, who can disrupt that passing game is really going to be key to this game. And then, you know, me and you were both saying that. So it's going to be one of the things to look at. And dude, this game too on Sunday. Oh my God, this is going to be a huge fucking game.
And Cincinnati actually had the worst rushing yards per game this year, 89.8.
Wow.
Number 31 Tampa Bay
Wow.
with 90.4.
Rashad White.
I
thought Rashad White was better.
I did too. And that's the thing. Like,
he's better in passing game, I guess.
When I first heard the game, right, just going off feelings, I'm like, Tampa Bay can win this game, right? Everything we saw last week and all that. But when I really dive in and look at how the Eagles' offensive line fell apart, how they were able to bring that pass rush because they couldn't run the football, and the fact that Tampa Bay is almost the league's worst rushing team, I just think they're going to have a little more issues. They're not at home with their own fans. They're going into a place that is a lot more hungry for a win than Tampa is going to be.
Yeah.
But hey, that's why we do this.
That's why we do this, baby. That's why we watch. This is why you play the game. And in our case, watch the game.